Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly, and we're back with another Matt the Hatch with Matt Green. How you doing, Matt?
How's it going, Marvin? Hope you're doing okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Just trying to stay out of trouble. How are you?
Doing good. Spending time at the microscope. We're teaching an aquatic entomology course at Clemson this semester. We teach it every 2 or 3 years or so, and we've got students out in the field collecting bugs, so I can report a little bit on what we're seeing here in terms of winter caddisflies today.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you seeing?
So we're seeing these caddisflies whose scientific name is Doliphalotus distinctus. They're just the winter caddisflies in the family Philopotamidae. Those are the fingernet caddisflies, and they get their name because their larvae construct these silk nets from silk glands in their mouth parts that look like fingers. And on the end of these nets, these caddisfly larvae construct these individual lines, kind of like a fiddle in a way, all right? And then a crisscross on the other side. And so it forms a net that fine particles and detritus are caught, normally in moderate to fast current. And that's what they feed on. They just run out, grab things on the net, on that mesh, run back in. And a little bit more about the larvae. They tend to be orange colored, sometimes yellow, with orange-brown heads. And it's a very interesting color combination in a winter habitat where there isn't much canopy cover and water is typically pretty clear. These things stand out on rocks. And I know trout eat them. I've pumped trout that have eaten them. And you don't really see anglers really fishing these larvae very often. They hug real tight to rocks. When you see them kind of walking around on a rock, they are very, very inconspicuous. Normally a size 14 to 18 hook if you're going to imitate them. I've used yellow-orange turkey biots before to imitate the bodies. No, just on a curved hook is fine.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you wouldn't think about maybe using like an orange tinted hare's ear or something like that?
You could if you want it more bushy or something like that. But the bodies of these larvae are pretty, very heavily sclerotized. That's what we call that. I guess the best way to say it is they're water dynamic. If you kind of think of aerodynamic, something that cuts through air, their bodies are designed in a way where they cut through water. So they can hang out right on the surface of rocks, right where something called laminar flow, where the flow is either almost zero or very, very high. And they just sit right there in that flow boundary layer and move along the rocks. So you can use something that's bushy, but really something that is a little bit more translucent or shiny. That's why I like using the non-ribbed side of a turkey biot. That tends to work well. And then you can also imitate segmentation based on the natural fibers of the biot. I mean, if you're familiar with biots, you're going to have the terminal tag of the biot is going to be kind of a very light color, almost a white, versus the other end is going to be the actual color that it's dyed. And so you can use that white color of the biot for segmentation. Now, as these larvae develop, they'll become pupae and then adults. And then the winter, that's where we're fishing them. And really unique about this species, and I'll say this species is also found in the summer, but the bulk of these insects of Doliphalotus distinctus emerge in the winter. The males have brown mottled wings. There's a kind of two types of wings. There's like a mottled with brown and then a solid brown. And then the females are actually wingless. It's very interesting. They don't have wings at all. You'll see them crawling on rocks. And you'll be like, what is that caddis pupa out of the water. What is it doing? It should have emerged. No, that's the female. It has emerged. That's real interesting. And you want to fish these insects up against substrate, rocks, boulders, riparian edges, much like you would the winter stoneflies that we talked about in the previous episode. And both the males and the females are going to be a size 16 or so. There are two kind of related genera to the winter caddisflies that we just talked about. Chimera, which are the small black spring and fall caddisflies, size 16 to 18 as adults. Larvae look very similar to Dolipholotus distinctus, except for a couple of head differences that we really won't get into. But in the early spring, Chimera about the first caddisflies to emerge, and then in the fall, in the mid and late fall, we have Wormaldia, which are these mottled wing adult caddisflies, size 16 to 18. That's a brown mottled wing on that insect. And so two related genera to Dolipholotus distinctus that you might want to know about, that you probably never heard before, but you could look up a little bit more information on if you like. I'll provide Marvin a link to that in his podcast.
Yeah, very neat. And I guess, in terms of dry flies, elk hair caddis and the appropriate size and color, kind of the way to go.
Yeah, elk hair caddis. You probably heard, if you're around the fly tying world, of the X caddis, popular fly over in Europe and the Northeast. I've been fishing these kinds of dry flies with a CDC feathers tied into a hook with a palmered body of either biot or hackle or dubbing of some sort, that color patterns on the bodies to match whatever insect you're imitating. And so those are all very effective as well as the elk hair caddis varieties. And just be sure to match your wing coloring and your body coloring to the insect that's emerging. These trout will get very picky on caddisflies for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the trick with the X caddis is it floats a little bit lower in the kind of the surface film than an elk hair caddis usually does, right?
It can. I will say that the elk hair caddis floats for a little bit longer and more effectively because it wicks water a lot better than CDC does. If you're going to fish CDC flies, you really need to bring something along with you that'll be able to wick the water away between applying a floating, like frog's fanny, for example, either in between 5 to 10 casts. You need to reapply. I think a lot of folks don't really apply, one, enough frog's fanny, two, don't get their flies dry enough with something like just a paper towel will work, to be quite frank, and they don't reapply frog's fanny often enough. When I take clients out, I'm saying, we need to reapply. We got to reapply. They'll hear that all the time. They probably get tired of it as well. But if you keep reapplying and you apply enough, you're going to be good to go with fishing these X caddisfly adult imitations. I think in my article in Fly Fisherman a couple of years ago, called that the downwing dun for the sulfur variation of that. And really all you're doing, it's a constant pattern. You're just changing the CDC color and the abdomen or the, whatever the color of the biot or the dubbing or the hackle to imitate the insect that you're fishing. And it'll work for a stonefly, mayfly, or a caddisfly, or even small midgets that you might want to imitate as well. Although we'll talk about those at some point in our podcast, Marvin. We'll talk about fishing tandem midges with hackle instead of CDC, like a size 24, 26 hackle midge. Fish tandem is a great way to go when fishing adult midges.
Got it. And is that what you want to talk about next time?
Yeah, we'll talk about tandem midges.
Yeah.
Very effective on tailwaters, particularly South Holston and Watauga, and even some of our delayed harvest streams. And really fishing a pretty specialized technique, but very effective in March and April, especially on the tailwaters before the big sulfur hatches and in between blueing olive or during blueing olive emergences hatches.
Yeah. And so, folks, if you want to ask Matt a question about fishing midges that way, if you email them to us or send them to us on our Instagram or our Facebook page, we'll be sure to work them into the next episode of Matt the Hatch. And anything else interesting going on before I let you hop? I think you're doing the graduate school thing of getting beers tonight. Anything else you want to share with folks?
Oh, not all that much more than just take care of your rivers if you can. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, folks. Well, listen, I appreciate you tuning in, and Matt, I appreciate you making the time. Tight lines, everybody.
Thanks, Marvin.